Well, I want to welcome all of you to Notre Dame Law School and to this presentation by Justice Alan Page. I'm Marcus Cole, I'm Dean of the Law School, and it's my distinct honor to welcome one of my childhood heroes. In fact, I think I'm not exaggerating if I say that Justice Alan Page is the reason why I am here. He was a hero of mine since he was a child, both on and off the field. He was born and raised in Canton, Ohio, by parents who stressed the importance of education and doing his best regardless of what others did. His mother passed away when he was only 13 years old, but he had a childhood dream to become a lawyer. So he graduated from Canton Central Catholic High School, where he excelled in football. And while in high school, he worked on the construction team that erected the Pro Football Hall of Fame, a building in which he is now honored. Justice Page is a true domer who earned his bachelor's degree in political science in 1967, while also leading the Fighting Irish to a national championship in 1966 as a consensus All-American. He was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in the first round of the 1967 draft, and he gained national recognition as a defensive tackle, a part of the formidable Minnesota Vikings Purple People Eaters. He is the first of only two players in NFL history, two defensive players, to win the NFL MVP. He enrolled at the University of Minnesota Law School while still playing professional football and earned his JD in 1978. He joined the Minneapolis-based law firm of Lindquist and Venom, where he practiced from 1979 to 1984. He was then appointed Special Assistant Attorney General of Minnesota in 1985. In 1992, he was elected to the Minnesota Supreme Court, where he was reelected in 1998, 2004, and 2010, and served there until he reached the court's mandatory retirement age in 2015. Justice Page holds honorary degrees from 10 schools, including 2 honorary doctorates from the University of Notre Dame, where he offered the commencement address to the class of 2004. Among his many accolades, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom last year. And as I said, he's the reason why I'm here, because it was because of Alan Page that my brother became a Notre Dame fan and committed himself to attending Notre Dame. And you've all heard my story. I also became a Notre Dame fan because of my brother. And so my brother was the only Minnesota Vikings fan in the city of Pittsburgh. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Alan Page.
Thank you for that kind introduction and for your warm welcome.
Well, my name is Jen Mason McAward. I'm a professor here at the law school and the director of the Clow Center for Civil and Human Rights. And I just want to reiterate that the law school community, the Notre Dame community, and the South Bend and alumni communities are just delighted and honored that you're here with us today. From Dean Cole's introduction, you can tell that one of the most prominent themes that comes from Justice Page's biography is the emphasis on the importance of education. And so I thought we'd start today by just talking about your own experience of being a student, first in Canton, Ohio, and then at Notre Dame. Brown versus Board was decided when you were 8 years old. Can you talk about your own experience of being a student at that time, and how did the Supreme Court's opinion affect your life?
Well, it affected my life in dramatic ways, although I grew up in Canton, Ohio, and Ohio is not one of the states that had state-sponsored segregation. Nonetheless, the court's decision created a hope not only in me, but in the community where I grew up. As you noted, I was 8 years old when the court decided Brown, and as I sit here, I can still remember sitting and reading the Cleveland Plain Dealer, reading stories about Brown as an 8-year-old, and having the sense, not really understanding, but having the sense that something very important had taken place. In a sense, the message was that we all should be treated equally and fairly, and that being separate and separated is not only constitutionally wrong, but morally wrong. And as I got older, developed a sense of what the law is about, it created in me a greater understanding of the court's power and the sense that there really was hope for equal justice under the law.
9 years after Brown was decided, you enrolled here at Notre Dame. You were a student here from 1963 to 1967, during which you were one of roughly 30 students of color on the entire campus. What was your experience like at Notre Dame on the football team, as a student, and how did being in a racial minority affect your experience?
Well, I get that question often, and I'm never quite sure how to answer it. And the reason I'm not sure how to answer it is because I tend to look at the world and deal with the world that is in front of me, not the world that I would like it to be. Certainly trying to create the world that I would like to be. But, you know, when you're one of 30 students of color on a campus, I mean, it just is what it is. And so you live your life as best you can. And quite frankly, there were 30 students, but there were places that didn't have any. And not any by accident, but by design. And so I understand the importance and value of having people who look like you and have some shared experience and some common background with you to interact with. But I also understand the value of being in a position in which you learn to function in what some might consider adverse circumstances, and recognizing that just because the circumstances aren't what you would like or what would be preferable, that you can still thrive and work hard and in some sense gives you an understanding of what change needs to be and some ideas about how to go about creating that change.
So after you left Notre Dame, you went on to a career in professional football, and during that career decided to pursue a law degree. What inspired you to pursue the law and to do so at that moment in your life?
Well, the inspiration for the law came long before I started law school. my path to the law really began as a kid. That 8-year-old we were talking about, Brown played a significant role in that. Also the fact that being an 8-year-old growing up in Canton, Ohio, not knowing any lawyers, not understanding what the law was about or how you became a lawyer, but hearing stories about lawyers, you know, at least from the 8-year-old mind, lawyers making lots of money, not working too hard, playing golf Wednesday afternoon and driving big fancy cars. And for a black kid growing up in Canton, Ohio, when you compare that to the other prospects, you know, driving big fancy cars and not working too hard comes out on top every time. And so I started, people would ask me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I would say I wanted to be a lawyer. But I think the role that Brown played, giving me that sense of the power of the law, and the power that courts have, and the power that judges have, and that I don't know, I don't recall when the first time I heard the term equal justice under law, but it wasn't, I mean, it may have even been, it may have even predated Brown. But growing up at a time when there wasn't equal justice, had a significant, or played a significant role in my interest in the law. And don't ask me sort of how it happened, or because I don't understand that, I don't know that. I do know that, and others would suggest that I have an overdeveloped sense of fairness and an overdeveloped sense of right and wrong. And I try, I think that sort of, to some degree, drove my interest in the law.
Well, I think most of us mere mortals look at your career trajectory and can't really imagine what that's like.
Well, you know, that shouldn't be the case, because I'm one of us mere mortals. We all have within us the power and the ability to work towards whatever the objective is, to try to make this world a better place, to try to ensure equal justice, to move, to bend the moral arc. We all have that power. I think you have to be intentional about it. It doesn't just happen. The things that I have been able to accomplish, if you will, they were all intentional in a way. Intentional in the sense of working to be as good as I could be at doing whatever I was doing at the moment. Not intentional in the sense of, well, I want to be a Supreme Court justice, so I'm going to be a Supreme Court justice. But doing what you do well, seeking excellence to try to achieve your highest self, and not only for the sake of winning.
One of the things about your path that I find most relatable is that it's, for any of us, it's not necessarily a direct path. And so I know that you started law school during your second season in the NFL and dropped out after 3 weeks. And then
and the only reason it was 3 weeks was because it took me 2.5 weeks to figure out how to drop out. I was so far in over my head, or at least I thought I was, I had no clue. I showed up for that first class. I don't even remember what it was. And the professor started talking, and it was Greek would have been easier to understand, and I didn't know Greek.
As a person who also tried to drop out of law school in my first year, I know that we actually have a group of first-year law students here who may be feeling some of the same feelings that you've described. Do you have any words of wisdom to share with them?
Yes. What I didn't know, I mean, I thought I was the dummy in the class. I thought I was the one that just didn't get it. I wasn't alone. There wasn't anybody in the class that knew anything any more than I did. The secret is to persevere and to apply yourself and work through it. And then, you know, it's sort of interesting that one day you wake up and it all sort of begins to make sense, a little bit of sense. Although I have to tell you, the struggle in understanding the law that I experienced in that first experience in the law school, that's part of the beauty and the challenge of the law. That's what I loved about being a judge, was struggling to understand in my own mind and hearing other people talk about and explain their views and understanding their views and how all that comes together to reach some conclusion about whatever it is, the issue that you're working with. I mean, that just because you're a first year doesn't mean that at the end of your career you won't be struggling with the same, you'll be struggling in a different way, but struggling to try to understand what the law is about and how you can use it and shape it to benefit your clients, benefit society, benefit those around you.
You spent 23 years as a justice on Minnesota's Supreme Court, and we're living in a time where judges are polarized and politicized, or at least viewed as extensions of the political system that either appointed or elected them. What was your experience of judging, and what's the proper way to understand the role of a judge?
The judge's role is to exercise his or her judgment, not his or her will. It is that simple. And we're all human. We all have preferences and views and all of that. But the challenge is to make sure that in everything you do as a judge, you question what your motivation is. At least that was my experience. To make sure that your decision was the exercise of your best judgment. The other thing that is I think important is that as a judge you have to be able to make difficult decisions that are inconsistent with your personal preference. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be a judge.
In your view, how can we help the public and our citizens understand what judges are doing, as opposed to the caricature of what the political system would have us think that they're doing?
Well, I should note that one of the problems we have is that we have politicized the process. At the state level, the election of judges and the influence of money is corrosive. There is no question about that. The Supreme Court has decided, rightly or wrongly, you can figure out which side of that I come out on, that a judge's right to speak, a judge's right to free expression is more important than a criminal defendant or other parties' right to due process, quite frankly. Because when judges can, in order to be elected, you know, sort of walk up to what they think is the line of just shy of saying, I'm going to rule X, Y, and Z in this particular case, when they can walk right up to that line and sometimes go over it and then not recuse themselves or otherwise step away when a case that they have expressed their opinion about in order to seek votes, to have the voter think that if I vote for this person, they are going to rule in the way that they said they were. That's a problem. And there has to be some way to take money and politics out of the election process at the state level. The federal level, the way to mitigate some of the I always have trouble with this word, politicization, not quite, but the politics, to take some of the politics out of the process would be for presidents to appoint a mix of people. That's actually really simple, as opposed to trying to appoint people at the ideological extremes. And, you know, I will say this, the richness, the reason we have on the court I serve 7 justices and 9 on the United States Supreme Court is the richness of the decision-making process when you get multiple individuals, multiple minds working on a problem. But if all those minds think alike, we haven't done anybody any favors, because we can't get the best decisions. The best decisions come when you've got ideally 9 people with different backgrounds, different views, different approaches, and the interchange or the interaction of those individuals in reaching a decision makes for the richness of the decision, and it makes it, I think, easier to accept. You know, as the judicial branch of our government has only one thing that gives it power. That is the trust and confidence of the people we serve. And note I say the people we serve. Without the trust and confidence of the citizens and non-citizens and everybody else in this country, without their trust and confidence, the judicial branch really doesn't have much of a role.
Last year, President Trump awarded you the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the nation's highest honor for a civilian. You had in the past been critical of President Trump, but you decided to attend the medal ceremony, telling a Minnesota newspaper, quote, "The honor is far more important than my personal beliefs." Can you just tell us about your decision to attend that ceremony and tell us what it was like?
You know, when I found out that I was going to be honored, I had to, quite frankly, ask myself, what should I do? Should I accept? Should I not accept? Should I go? Should I not go? And and my gut reaction was not now, no way, no how, not ever, never going to happen. Until I sat down and thought about, well, wait a minute. You're being recognized. First of all, it's the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's not the President Trump Medal of Freedom. And why would anyone be willing to recognize you? Presumably it's for the things that I had done over time. Well, the things that I have done in my life, I haven't done alone. All of these recognitions, whether it's the Presidential Medal of Freedom or anything else, none of it was done by me alone. I have had the privilege of standing on the shoulders of untold people, some known and some unknown. My ancestors who came to this country in the belly of a slave ship, my children who have supported me every step of the way in everything I've done, the people who died, who gave their lives so that somebody like me, somebody with skin the color of mine, could have a fair opportunity to achieve the Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerners of the world. Those people gave far more than anything I could give by having to go to a ceremony to be recognized. And those people contributed in untold ways to who I am. And it also I lost my wife a year ago, just before I was found out that I was going to be a Medal of Freedom winner. And the work that she did in being my partner in creating the Page Education Foundation, in supporting me as a lawyer, it would have been, and after, thinking about this, it would have been dishonoring to all of those people, to say the least, to do something other than to receive the medal. Because in the end, it was about them as much about them as it is about me. I could not have begun to have the success that I've had, however you measure success. And I happen to measure it by the journey, not by the end results. But whatever measure you use, it would have been difficult for me to wake up in the morning and look at myself in the mirror had I not done what I could to honor those people.
To stay on that theme, you and your wife created an exhibit, a public exhibit, which you called Testify, which displays your personal collection of art and artifacts from the slave era through the Jim Crow era. It features things like bricks made by slaves used to build the White House, a slave collar from Virginia, and various Jim Crow era signs. Can you just talk about what made you decide to amass that collection, and then why you decided to display it publicly?
Well, it's interesting. The collection began with Diane wanting to make sure that our children had a sense of who we are as a people, who we are as a country, who we are as a civilization, what this country has been, its past, and its future. And so she started the collection. And over the years, we were fortunate enough to obtain some pretty moving pieces. There is a banner, an Abraham Lincoln banner from 1864. We initially thought it was from 1865 in his funeral processions, but the banner, it's like that, about that. And on one side it says, "Uncle Abe, we will not forget you." And on the other it says, "Our country shall be one country." For me, that gives me the sense of the challenges that we've had in the past and the hope for the future. We are still not one country. Indeed, we are in a time when we're more divided and becoming more divided by the day. And I still have hope for that. Our country shall be one country. But we collected all of these things initially sort of for us as a family. But then it became clear that all of these items, and the items range from some of the worst you can imagine. I mean, I can't imagine having one of those slave collars around my neck being controlled by another human being. I have real difficulty getting my head around that. And it's a little unnerving to handle those objects. But we also have there were some very beautiful pieces of art in the collection. And so it sort of, again, from the despair to the beautiful. The other aspect of some of those items that sort of are from the ugly side of our history. Both Diane and I felt strongly that we cannot ever forget that we have to preserve these items and show these items so that future generations understand where we've come from and how far we have to go. It is vitally important that, you know, when we have conversations about whether we should remove monuments, for example, when we have those conversations, we need to have these artifacts around so that people can understand what some of these monuments are really all about. And I, you know, in the sense of, you know, should this monument go down and should that one, you know, I don't have a problem with them staying so long as we recognize and understand what they really stand for. When somebody makes the argument that, you know, the Robert E. Lee, just because that's the first name that comes to mind, his monument should stay because it's a recognition of our history and our past. Well, I want that slave collar there so that people understand just what that history and that past is. It's not this gallant figure on the horse. It is about the subjugation of one human being by another.
There are many ways to protest racial injustice, and we've seen American athletes over the years lead protests in different ways. So in 1968, runners Tommie Smith and John Carlos gave the Black Power salute at the Olympics. More recently, we've seen Colin Kaepernick take a knee to protest police brutality. What's your view of these types of protests and the role that prominent American athletes or others can do to raise visibility around these issues?
Well, I think we all have the ability to stand up for justice. One of the professors that I had in law school had this saying, and I don't know where he got it from, but he used to say, never whisper justice. Never whisper justice. And so when athletes or others stand up, it is about justice and about nothing else. And so I applaud them for their courage. There are lots of different ways, lots of ways to stand up for justice. Some is by drawing attention to it. Another way is to work to ensure it. Both are necessary. You know, standing up and calling attention to the problem won't solve it. It'll draw attention to it, but it won't solve it. The real question is, what are the practical steps that we can all take? I talked about being intentional. What are the intentional, practical steps we can all take to ensure justice?
One of the intentional, practical steps that you and your wife chose to take was to create the Page Education Foundation, which has provided more than $14 million in college scholarships for kids of color and requires in return community service. Can you talk about that program and why you decided to commit your resources to that foundation?
I had the good fortune of having parents who knew and understood the importance of education. They made sure that I knew and understood it. They understood that education was a tool that anyone can use, that no one can take away from you, that anyone can use to achieve whatever their hopes and dreams may be. And it's interesting. As a result of, in my case, as a result of that parental influence, and quite frankly, when I started playing football, they put you on a pedestal. Well, almost before I'd ever showed up for the first day of football practice as a freshman, I was on the pedestal because people knew I was going to play. They didn't know whether I was going to be a good player or a bad player or anything else, but all of a sudden, I'm getting this special attention. And people started asking me, "You're a football player. Could you talk to young children about the values of football?" And of course, I'm a young child. I mean, I'm 14, so not that young, but young enough. And I don't know anything about football. But yet, here I am on this pedestal. Along the way, as a result of that, I've spent a lot of times in schools and classrooms across the country, talking to young children about the importance and value of education. We decided that, beyond talking, we needed to take action. So we decided, actually, when we found out that I was going to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, we decided that this was the time to act. We could use that recognition as a vehicle to do something concrete. So we came up with the idea of a foundation. And we sat down with our kids and told them what we were thinking about it. And our youngest daughter, or our number 2 daughter, we have 3 daughters and a son. Number 2 daughter said, "Scholarship program, great idea, but you're missing something." Well, what are we missing? Well, there's this thing, this was back in 1988. There's this new thing called mentoring that they've been talking about in school. And she said, "Let me do some research, and it might be worthwhile to figure out some mentoring component." She came back with the idea, if you had your scholarship recipients work with young children in schools or as tutors, that could be powerful. And of course, the light went on. I mean, what we were going to do was use my celebrity to create this foundation to help children. Well, the fact is that we are influenced, all of us, no matter who you are. We're influenced literally by the people we can reach out and touch. Most of us can't reach out and touch an athlete. Having our scholars work as tutors, mentors, and role models enabled us to magnify the reach of what we were trying to accomplish. And so we started in 1988. The first year we had 10 Page Scholars. This year we have 567. We have, over the time period, we've had more than 7,500. And each one of those scholars, they spend 50 hours per academic year while they're in school, tutoring young children in schools and other community-based programs. Each of those scholars sends to the children that they work with the strong, clear message that education is a tool that you can use. I mean, they do it by both word and by deed. And those young children get to see somebody using education as that tool in a practical sense. That has a real impact. That has a real impact. And, I talked earlier about those who have sort of been a part of who I am, and how it would have been a disservice not to have accepted the Medal of Freedom. Those 7,500 plus Page Scholars deserve the recognition. In the end, just going back to that for a second, I concluded that it was more important to shed some light than to create more heat. And when I think about it, that's sort of been the life that I've tried to live. How do we shed light and not simply spend our time creating heat?
In 2017, there were students at a middle school in Minneapolis. The school was named Ramsey Middle School. It was named after a Minnesota territorial governor who had, among other things, advocated for exterminating the Sioux people. And the students lobbied successfully to have their school renamed the Justice Page Middle School. One of the things about that story that most resonated with me was that in accepting the honor, you pointed out to the students that they could have lobbied to have the school named the Allen Page Middle School, but instead they chose the Justice Page Middle School. And you praised them for understanding that what they were doing was talking about justice.
Well, that's what they were seeking in changing the name to take the name of Ramsey away from their school because of his history. What they were seeking was justice. And they understood that. They get it. Young people are a lot smarter than we think. And quite frankly, a lot smarter than some of us. But, I never whispered justice. They weren't about to whisper it. They wanted it to be loud and clear.
Are there other lessons that you would hope that not just middle school students, but Notre Dame students or law school students or students in the School of Life might take from your storied career and lifelong commitments?
Well, we live in a perilous time. And the peril is from within. We are, I think, at a crossroads when it comes to our character. And how we individually and collectively go forward. will determine our future. And one of the biggest concerns that I have at the moment is this notion that we can lie and it doesn't matter, that we don't have to be truthful. I think that is a real danger to us as a society, to us individually. We have to tell the truth, as painful as it can be at times. Because at least as I see it, truth is connected inextricably with trust. And if we don't have trust, we don't have anything. If in our interpersonal relationships, we can't trust, what have we got? How do we live as a society? I don't think we can. And so this notion that it's somehow okay to simply lie and move on, we can't let that happen. We cannot let that happen. And that is not to say that we all have to agree, although when it comes to the facts, I mean, the facts are the facts. And we can all have our opinions about those facts. And it's, I think, healthy to have a robust debate about the inferences to be drawn from the facts. But none of us are entitled to our own facts. And so this notion that lying is okay, I think is a clear and present danger.
Notre Dame is a Catholic university, prizes the search for truth, and believes that faith and reason can be integrated. In this time and in this day, what should be distinctive about a Notre Dame education that will help our students engage meaningfully in the search for truth and leadership in our society?
I think intentionality about searching for the truth. Searching and working to be ethical, to understand that just because we, the demonstrable facts, we see them from a different angle and different perspectives, doesn't mean that somebody who sees them differently than we do are bad people. That we can work to understand where they're coming from to the extent that that's possible. And then sort of, at the end of the day, working intentionally to figure out the difference between right and wrong and doing what is right. Not what is expedient, not what is necessarily preferable, what you would like to see happen, but what is right.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I've been very greedy in asking all the questions. And so my instinct is to open it up for just a couple questions, but to invite the students who are here to be the ones who have the opportunity to engage with Justice Page. Do any of our students have a question? Yes.
Justice Page. You retired at the age of 70 because you have to retire at the age of 70 in Minnesota. Do you feel that that policy is ageist, or that it's good to have a lot of turnover?
Yes. I think it's important to get contributions from everybody. And there is no magic number when people should go. I think it's, in my case, it's probably a good thing that they had the mandatory retirement age, because don't get me wrong, I loved every minute of my time serving on the court. But I had probably been there long enough. I could still have made a contribution and would still have enjoyed it. But in the end, as a judge, you hold the seat for some period of time, and at some point it becomes time for someone else. Whether that's, after 6 years or 60 years, I'm not necessarily qualified to say. Depends on the individual, their engagement and their ability to engage in the difficult and challenging issues, and their ability to maintain their ability to be impartial.
Thank you very much, Justice Page. I'm from South Africa, and I see that with South Africa and America that we have a lot of similar experiences when it comes to racial tension between black and white. And with reconciliation, I feel like have a lot of challenges in our country when it comes to that. And even in America, still like the same brutality or like even like people. How would you rethink? How do you think we should like rethink reconciliation? Unifying together as a different answers. I think it's the process of attending right now. I'm just thinking a lot about that and how South Africa could have done reconciliation better. So with the United States, do you think anything like we can rethink how reconciliation?
Well, South Africa is well ahead of the United States when it comes to reconciliation. At least that's my sense. And I don't know that I've thought through completely, and just in a bit of advice for the law students. Just because you have opinions doesn't mean you should always state them. Just because it doesn't mean you shouldn't, but there are times when you need to think about what the question is, what the issue is. And I'm not sure that I've thought enough about your question to give an answer other than I mean, some of these issues they almost seem impossible to resolve. That said, talking about them, accepting responsibility for our role in them. And we all have a role in what goes on. I mean, I look at where we are in the United States during the time period I've been around, and I've got some role in that, where we are today, and some responsibility for it. And I think we all have to sort of engage in that way and with each other as human beings.
Well, as a law professor, I often wonder if my students ever listen to anything I say. But you clearly listened to your law professor who told you never whisper justice. And that law professor has made an impact on me today, and I think on all of us, through not only his words, but through your life, which I think is fairly characterized by never whispering justice. So can you please join me in thanking Justice Page for his talk?
Enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you.